Hey, check this out. You know what Eric asked me when I got into work this morning?
I have no idea. What did he ask you?
He asked me if I felt the earthquake last night.
Earthquake? You gotta be kidding. I didn't feel an earthquake.
I know, that's what I said. He told me it actually woke him up last night. You know,
What?
yeah, it was like it happened at like 4:42 in the morning, so we must have been sleeping. But I mean, it's possible that, even if we had been awake, we might not have felt it because, maybe it wasn't felt, this far north. But I mean, I thought he was pulling my leg when he first talked about it.
Well, I guess it's not so far-fetched considering we live on a major fault line here.
Yeah, but actually, I think this earthquake was on a different fault line, because Eric lives just south of San Jose,
Yeah.
and the earthquake he said was due east of San Jose, so he was obviously a lot closer to the epicenter than we were. So I'm not even sure it was felt here.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I've experienced quite a few earthquakes in the past several years, but I've been living here now a little over 2 years. I think I've only experienced one here. It was really strange too. I should say each earthquake has been a completely different experience. But the one I felt here, I was standing outside a restaurant talking to AJ and another friend, and all of a sudden it just felt like this shift. It's really hard to explain, but it made me think of like a cartoon, like how in the cartoon, like buildings might just shift to the right and then shift right back.
Yeah, without falling.
Yeah, without falling. And I had no idea what was going on for a few minutes afterwards, and then I realized, oh, that must have been an earthquake.
Yeah, you know what I usually notice? The times that I've been at home here and there's been an earthquake, it's almost as if there's this really big train or like a gigantic Mack truck going by, and suddenly I start to hear the heater shaking, and it's like the noise is loud for like a second, and then it's gone. So it's really weird. It's almost like the first couple of times I felt it, I wasn't even aware it was an earthquake while it was happening.
Well, that's so funny you say that because one that I experienced in Bangkok, it actually was after the tsunami. And so later I found out that it was aftershock from the tsunami. But anyway, I was in a building up on the 9th floor, and suddenly there was all this rattling. And I'm thinking to myself, it was so irrational. I'm thinking to myself, God, there's like a train going by, and I can't believe that this building is shaking so much from the train. And of course, a train wouldn't have made a building, or at least me up on the 9th floor, feel something to that effect. And I think it happened about 2 times. And that one wasn't until several days later when I was talking to people and they were like, oh, did you feel the earthquake? Then it dawned on me, oh, that was an earthquake.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy how when you're not used to feeling them, you could think it's something else.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, totally.
I've been living here for a while now, and I've definitely felt my share of earthquakes. I mean, when you live here, it's a given that you're going to experience earthquakes. You just hope that you're not going to be here for the big one.
Yeah, right.
When I first moved here, it was about 5 years after the Loma Prieta earthquake, which was a very big earthquake here. And there are a lot of people who lived here who I met who had actually been living in the area when the earthquake hit. So it was interesting to get their perspective. And it also, made me remember where I was when I heard about the Loma Prieta earthquake. I was watching the World Series on TV, and, it was taking place in San Francisco. So as I'm watching it, suddenly the announcer starts saying, wow, I think we're feeling an earthquake here, and the cameras started shaking. And all of a sudden, the TV coverage cut out. So, I wanted to get a rundown on what happened. So I turned to the news station, and within a few minutes, they were discussing this gigantic earthquake that had hit San Francisco. And they started showing pictures, maybe 30 minutes later, of these people who were trying to weed through the rubble of these buildings that had been like coming down. So, I mean, it was pretty scary. I'll tell you what, you know?
Yeah. Well, the 3 months I was living in Japan, I experienced two. Both of those were very different from the one I'd experienced here, and also very different from the one in Bangkok. But one of them, I was actually up in my apartment, which was on the 5th floor of a building, and I was woken up at about 5 o'clock in the morning to the building swaying. And because earthquakes are like a dime a dozen in Japan, they've built a lot of their buildings to absorb the shock. So that's why it was swaying. It was a very surreal feel.
Hi, this is Kristen Dodds.
And this is Joe Weiss. And we just wanted to let you know that this material Hello! Welcome to the mini-story lesson for the conversation titled Earthquakes. Let's get started with the story. Luke lives in San Francisco. Luke can eat 50 eggs in 1 hour. Luke told his friend George. George thought this seemed far-fetched. He thought that Luke was pulling his leg. "You've got to be kidding," he said to Luke. So Luke bet George $100 that he can eat 50 eggs in 1 hour. Luke ate 15 eggs in the first 10 minutes. Then, all of a sudden, the ground started to shake. There was an earthquake due east of San Francisco. Luke was not surprised, because earthquakes are a dime a dozen in San Francisco. When you live in San Francisco, it's a given that you will feel an earthquake, said Luke. Totally, said George. Then Luke ate the rest of the eggs in 22 minutes, so George had to give him $100. Okay, so that's our story. Now I will start at the beginning of the story, and as I read the story, I will ask questions. And as always, please answer the questions out loud. If you need a little more time, then you can pause your iPod or your MP3 player and take as much time as you need to answer the questions. Of course, if you just feel like listening to the questions and not answering them, that's fine as well. Okay, so here we go. Luke lives in San Francisco. Does Luke live in San Francisco? Yes, he does. Luke lives in San Francisco. Who lives in San Francisco? Luke. Luke lives in San Francisco. Does Larry or Luke live in San Francisco? Luke does. Luke lives in San Francisco. Does Larry live in San Francisco? No, Larry doesn't live in San Francisco. Where does Luke live? San Francisco. Luke lives in San Francisco. Does Luke live in New York or San Francisco? San Francisco. He lives in San Francisco. Does Luke live in New York? No, Luke doesn't live in New York. Does Luke live in San Francisco? Yes, that's correct. Luke lives in San Francisco. Luke can eat 50 eggs in 1 hour. Can Luke eat 50 eggs in 1 hour? Yes, he can. I mean, that sounds like a lot of eggs, but he can do it. He can eat 50 eggs in 1 hour. What can Luke do?